All right, good to see you guys. My name is Hunter. I'm one of the pastors here along with Dave, who you just met. Is anything ringing out there? Anything ringing? No? We're good? All right, we're a well-oiled machine here, as you can tell. Look forward to meeting some of you at the newcomer lunch, which is on the second floor. The ballroom that we're going to meet in is on the second floor. So head down there after church, and we will be there to meet you and talk a little bit about what's going on here. So look forward to meeting you. If you have a Bible, grab it, and let's go to Acts chapter 4. And if you need a Bible, you can find some paperback ones on the end of your rows there, and you will find the book of Acts in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are four Gospels, which are accounts of Jesus' life. And right after that comes the book of Acts. Acts was written by a fellow named Luke, who was an early Gentile convert to Christianity, and he became a traveling companion of the Apostle Paul, who shows up in the second half of this book. And Luke wrote some of this from personal experience traveling with Paul. He wrote the rest of it from meticulous research, and he is recounting for us the spread of the Jesus movement from its origins in Jerusalem all the way throughout the Roman Empire, around the Mediterranean world, ending in Rome. And in the first 7 chapters of this book, he focuses particularly on the very first church in Jerusalem. And so far, we have gotten through 3 chapters, and here's what we've seen. Everything has gone quite swell for these guys in Jerusalem. In chapter 1, they got some final teaching and instruction from Jesus. He said that he was going to give them his Holy Spirit, and they were going to be missionaries, and they would be his witnesses in Jerusalem, where they were, Judea, the region around Jerusalem, Samaria, the place they didn't want to go to, and even to the ends of the earth, he said. And then in chapter 2, Jesus did just that. He poured out his Spirit on them, and they became more aware of and more cognizant than ever of what Jesus had done for them, and they began to proclaim it to people around them. In fact, Peter, who was the leader of this little band of about 180 Jesus followers, Peter got up and preached the very first sermon in the history of Christianity, and about 3,000 people converted to Jesus. So in one day, they went from being a dinky little tribe of 180 people to a mega church of 3,180. And then we saw in chapter 3, they were still participating in the life of the temple. And one day while they are going into the temple, Peter and John, who were 2 of the leaders of the band, Peter and John healed a man who had been lame from birth. And this was incredible to all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and everyone who was in the temple was amazed by this. Peter got a chance to preach again, and so he preached again, and we're going to see here in a second, 5,000 more people came to faith in Jesus. And so I tell you all of that to say this is going really well for them so far. But today, in chapter 4 and forward, and really forever until our day, we are going to see a problem begin to develop. In fact, from this point forward, things are not always going to go swell. Jesus is still going to be converting people, and Jesus is still going to be doing his mission, and he is still going to be changing people's lives. And that has always happened, but from this point forward, there's going to be problems. There's going to be obstacles. There is going to be trouble. Jesus said, in this world you will have much trouble. And it turns out Jesus was right. And from now on there is going to be trouble, and there is going to be opposition, and there's going to be internal disputes and debates to mediate, and there's going to be opposition from outside as well. And we're going to see all of that unfold in the rest of the book of Acts. There is going to be opposition. And today in particular, we are going to see a tension that has always been at the very heart of Christianity. And my guess is wherever you are spiritually, whether you are a Christian or you are not a Christian, whether you have been following Christ for a long time or you are just beginning to check out his claims, wherever you are, you feel this tension that we are going to see today. Now, you guys know how tension works, right? One force or person pulls on one end, and another force or person pulls on another end, and in the middle, it's tension. And we're going to see tension develop here in Acts chapter 4. And just to unpack it a little bit for you, the tension is going to go something like this. Some people have always heard and have always received the message of Jesus as good news. In fact, the word gospel, which is the word that just summarizes his message, the word gospel literally means good news, and some people receive it as just that. It sounds great to them, and they say, I want that, and I want to be with Jesus. And that's how some people respond to him. But other people don't hear the gospel as good news at all. they hear it as threatening, or they hear it as confusing, or they hear it as irritating, or even offensive. And this tension has always been at the very heart of Christianity. Some people love Jesus, and some people don't love Jesus. In fact, some people are quite irritated by him. If we were to read one of the Gospels, we would find this tension throughout his own personal ministry. He would heal people, and they would be like, "You've changed my life." And other people were like, "You're of the devil." It's pretty extreme reactions. And we're going to see it again here in Acts chapter 4. In fact, I think we'll see the tension if we just read the first few verses. So let's jump in here, Acts chapter 4, and we'll pick it up in verse 1. This is coming right on the heels of them healing this lame man. It's not like a day later, it's like right on the heels. They've just preached to the crowd. And chapter 4, verse 1 continues. As they were speaking to the people, the priest and the captain of the temple and the Sadducees came upon them, greatly annoyed because they were teaching the people and proclaiming in Jesus the resurrection from the dead. And they arrested them. That is Peter and John. They arrested them and put them in custody until the next day, for it was already evening. But many of those who heard the word believed, and the number of the men came to about 5,000. Now, do you see the tension? About 5,000 more people have just decided that this gospel of Jesus sounds really good, but the priest and the captain of the temple and the Sadducees are greatly annoyed and have arrested them and thrown them in prison. This is the tension that is at the heart of Christianity and that has always existed. Now, why were they so annoyed? Let's read on and we'll find out. Verse 5, on the next day, their rulers and elders and scribes gathered together in Jerusalem with Annas the high priest and Caiaphas, these are the same cats that crucified Jesus, and John and Alexander and all who were of the high priestly family. And when they had set them in the midst, they inquired. So they're going to begin putting the disciples on trial, you could say. They're going to be inquiring among them, what are you doing exactly? So when they had set them in the midst, they inquired, by what power or by what name did you do this? Then Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, said to them, rulers of the people and elders, if we are being examined today concerning a good deed done to a crippled man, by what means this man has been healed, let it be known to all of you and to all the people of Israel that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead, by him this man is standing before you well. This Jesus is the stone that was rejected by you, the builders, which has become the cornerstone. And there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Now, did you hear that claim that Peter made right there at the end? In fact, it came right there in verse 12. Did you hear that? And my guess is, whether you're a Christian or not, that claim begins to rub us a little bit, doesn't it? This claim has always been at the heart of Christianity. And get this claim has always been problematic for many people who hear the gospel of Jesus. Now, it's problematic in our culture, and I'll unpack why that is in a minute. And I'll explain to you why our culture finds this problematic. But here's the thing to get. It wasn't like us modern people are suddenly offended by this claim that there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. People in the very first hearing of the gospel were offended by this as well, and it's been that way ever since. You could call this problem the problem of exclusivity, and to many in our culture it sounds absurd, and the objection would go like this: how can there be just one true faith? I mean, how can you, given the diversity of all the different religious perspectives and all the different spiritualities in our world, how could you possibly say, Peter, that there is just one name under heaven by which we must be saved? How can you say there is salvation in no one else? And it also, to many in our culture, sounds dangerous. If you think your religion is the only way to God, I mean, won't you then be disrespectful to people of other faiths? Aren't you being disrespectful to even claim that? In fact, some people would even say, doesn't this kind of thinking lead to hatred and violence in our world? In fact, have we not in recent times experienced quite a bit of warfare in our world that we could say was driven by exclusive religious claims. And so if Jesus is just one more guy making an exclusive religious claim, how could his gospel possibly be good news? This is the problem that people in our world begin to ask. And I'll be honest, it's a very good question. I'm not here to mock you for asking that. It's a very good question. And if you're a Christian, you will probably feel strong tension to downplay or deny or distance yourself from this aspect of Jesus' message. It's very popular today to say, I believe in Jesus. He was a good guy, and he taught some really good things, and I try to follow his teachings. But I would never say, he's the only way to salvation. That's a very common thing to hear even professing Christians say. But here's the problem with that. We have no shred of evidence that Jesus who lets you make that claim, like I can just follow his teaching, but I don't have to buy into this other aspect. There's no shred of evidence that Jesus ever existed in history. In fact, Jesus himself made similar claims to what Peter said right here in John chapter 14, which is a fairly well-known verse. Jesus said, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Another exclusive claim. So if you just want to take Jesus at his word and you just want to have an honest, accurate historical portrayal of Jesus, this is an aspect of his teaching that you have to wrestle with and you have to deal with. Because there's no shred of evidence that he gives you another option, that there's another Jesus. So here's what I want to do today. I want to just acknowledge on the front end that this is strange and offensive to us. And I want to go back and I want to look at what was happening right here in Jerusalem in this very first opposition that the church encountered. And I want to ask why it was offensive to some of these people. And I want to see if that doesn't answer why it's also offensive to us as well. Now, to understand what was going on, we need to know who the people were who were opposed to this message. Who were these priests and captain of the temple and the Sadducees? These people were the official leaders of Judaism in the days of the early church. The priests were the priestly class of people, and this would have been the top echelon of the priests who ran the temple in Jerusalem. The captain of the temple was in charge of security and order around the temple, and the Sadducees were the priestly class. They were the aristocratic class, the cultural elites of their days. These were the powers who really influenced and controlled the direction of Judaism in their day, and their power was built on two different aspects. First, they had the temple in Jerusalem, which was the place where Jews met God, and they ran that. So if you run the place where people meet God in a religious culture, you have some power. And so they ran the temple. Now, secondly, they had also negotiated a bit of a sweetheart agreement with Rome, because Israel is not governed by themselves in this day. They are governed by Rome. They're a territory of the Roman Empire. And the Sadducees and the priests had negotiated a treaty with Rome. And the treaty went something like this. The Romans said, "You maintain order and maintain peace and make sure we get our taxes paid. And we will allow you to run your little temple." And that was the agreement. You maintain peace and you maintain order, and we'll leave you alone and let you do your little religious thing and run your temple. And that was the agreement they had with Rome. So that's what was going on. And then when you begin to hear the message that Peter and John were proclaiming, you begin to understand why this sounded threatening to them. For example, in verse 2, we hear this: "They were greatly annoyed because they were teaching the people and proclaiming in Jesus the resurrection from the dead." Now, when you hear that they were proclaiming the resurrection from the dead, don't just think that they were proclaiming Jesus' resurrection from the dead, though they were. There was a strain of teaching in Judaism that went back to the prophets in the Old Testament. You can go read the prophets at the end of your Old Testament. There was a strain of teaching within Judaism that went like this: one day God is going to come again and visit his people, and when he comes, he is going to overturn everything that is wrong in the world. He is going to make all wrongs right. He is going to heal death, There will be no more disease. There will be no more chaos. There will be no more fighting. He is going to overturn the present order. And when he comes to do that, you'll know he's doing that because he is going to raise his people, literally raise his people from the dead. He's going to bring the dead back to life. Now, if the dead came back to life, that would be a good sign that some things were different than the present order that we experience, right? I remember when I was a little kid and I first encountered death, I didn't know what to do with it. And so my great-grandmother had died, and I sat there by her casket just silently praying, make her come back, make her come back, make her come back, make her come back. And she didn't. We put dirt on top of her, and we went and had casserole back at her house. We divided her belongings. I got a wall clock out of the deal. But she is dead. If resurrection happened, that would be really significant. God is really changing the order. And the prophets taught that God was going to do that one day. Now, here's the interesting thing. These guys were proclaiming that had begun with Jesus. But the Sadducees and the chief priests, they didn't believe in resurrection. And they taught the people that was silly talk. That was a silly thing to believe in. They did not believe in resurrection. And why do you think they didn't believe in resurrection? Why do you think they didn't want the present order to be overturned? Because for them, the present order was just fine. They were the ones in charge. They were the ones at the top of the heap. And so they didn't care to believe or to teach about resurrection. And so they're greatly annoyed by this. Now, on top of that, when Peter said, there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved, they would have heard that as a threat to the temple. Because in their system, where was salvation found? Salvation was found in the temple. And so if you're saying that salvation is not found in the temple, but is found in Jesus, that means the temple is not needed anymore. And if the temple isn't needed anymore, then we're not as important as we used to be. So they're offended by this. On top of that, thousands of people have started to believe this. 3,000 one day, and now 5,000 more. And so this movement is beginning to gain steam. And that's creating another problem, because do you remember their sweetheart agreement with Rome? You guys maintain peace and order, and we'll leave you alone. But what if thousands of people are starting to follow another movement? It's starting to look like these guys can't control their population, isn't it? Now, this is why they feel threatened. So here's how you could summarize this. The gospel, the message that salvation is through Jesus, not temple. That God is restoring the whole world through his death and through his resurrection, which we don't believe in. That you can now be reconciled to God and part of his kingdom by repenting and believing in Jesus. And that, in fact, this is the only way that would actually bring salvation. That was in direct competition to the authorities' whole view of the world, which went like this: come to our temple and trust us to take care of everything else. Now, get this, and this is very important for you to get. Peter's claim, there is salvation in no one else, that was an exclusive, overarching, superior claim. But it was not the only exclusive claim being made in that culture, in that day. There is salvation in the temple, and prosperity for Israel will only come through us. That also was an exclusive claim being made by the religious authorities in that day. So get this, there wasn't just one exclusive claim being made in this passage. There was two. And this dynamic plays out every time the gospel is preached, and in every culture the gospel goes into. Everywhere the gospel goes, there's not just Jesus making an exclusive claim. There's always some other exclusive claim also being made. And these two begin to come into competition, which is what explains the tension that we all feel. In every culture the gospel goes into, there is another system of salvation that is already in place. Now, when I say system of salvation, don't just hear salvation in religious and spiritual terms like how to know God or how to go to heaven when you die. It would include that. But salvation could also be thought of in more holistic terms. What will make for a better world? What will bring peace and what will bring justice and what will make the world right? And in every culture the gospel has gone into, there is another system of salvation that says, believe whatever you want to, but you've got to believe in this. And you've got to give credit to this. And you've got to submit to this. And you've got to bring all other claims that you want to make under the authority of this one claim. That was happening here, and that happens in every culture the gospel has ever gone into. Now, as we continue reading this, we will see, not reading today, but as we continue going through Acts in future weeks, we will see this happen when the gospel goes into the Roman Empire. It's going to leave Jerusalem, and we're going to leave these Sadducees and these chief priests of the temple. We're going to leave these guys behind, and it is going to go into Roman culture. And the same conflict is going to exist in Roman culture that it's existing right here in Jerusalem. And that's a curious thing, because Roman culture was not monotheistic. Roman culture was very pluralistic. There were all kinds of gods and spiritualities that were practiced throughout the Roman Empire. People worshipped all kinds of different gods. And here's the thing, Rome was actually very tolerant toward all these different gods that were worshipped. Rome said, worship whatever gods you want to worship. And if you want to worship this God, and you want to worship this God, and you want to practice this spirituality, and if you don't want to do any of that at all, it's all fine. Worship whatever you want to. They were very pluralistic, probably more pluralistic even in the age in which we live in. And they were very tolerant. But in Roman culture, there was one catch. There was one catch. Worship whatever you want to, as long as you acknowledge that Caesar is preeminent. And that was the system of salvation in Roman culture. In fact, you would have heard it over and over throughout the empire. The proclamation was, Caesar is Lord. And do you know what the core proclamation of Christianity was? Jesus is Lord. When the Romans said Caesar is Lord, they meant that Caesar is over all and everything has to come under his rule and under his authority. And when the Christians said Jesus is Lord, they meant that Jesus is the King of heaven and earth and everything needs to come under his rule and his authority. Can you see the conflict that was going to arise as this gospel went into the Roman world? Now, here's the thing you have to see, though. Jesus is Lord, the claim of the Christians. That was an exclusive truth claim. But it wasn't the only exclusive claim being made in Roman culture. Caesar is Lord was equally exclusive. And there wasn't just one exclusive truth claim. There were two. And this happens everywhere the gospel goes. Now, with that in mind, let's think about our culture and the day in which we live. And let's acknowledge that this claim of Christianity sounds exclusive, and it is. There is salvation in no one else. Now, why is this offensive in our culture? Because there is another widely held belief at play in our culture that gets rankled by this. And it would go something like this. All religions are equally valid and basically teach the same thing. Or each religion sees part of spiritual truth, but none can see the whole truth. And therefore it's arrogant, maybe even dangerous, to teach that one religion is right and to try to convert people to it. Because all religions just see part of the truth. Now that is the prevailing view of reality in our culture. That is the prevailing system of salvation at play. So let's just think about it for a minute. What about all religions are equally valid and basically teach the same thing? Now this sounds appealing at first. But if you just begin to study different religions, you will discover that they don't teach the same thing. In order to validate this claim that all religions are equally valid and teach the same thing, you would just need to discover them all and study them. And if you just begin to study major religious perspectives in our culture and around the world, you would not have to get very deep into them. You could just examine the essence of them, just the essential parts of them. And you would see that they begin to claim things that you can't square logically together. For example, just take the person of Jesus. In Islam, Jesus is a prophet. And they will, when they say Jesus' name, they will say, "Blessed be his name." And they have great reverence for Jesus. But at the core of Islam is a belief that man and God are so distinct that a man could never become God or never be God. And yet, at the heart of Christianity is a claim that one man is God, that Jesus is God and man together. So these claims are fundamentally, logically at odds. In fact, if you get an honest Muslim and an honest Christian leader together, they would just admit that we have fundamental, irreconcilable disagreement on that very issue. And that would just play itself out if you began to examine all different religions. You would discover that they make claims that just can't be squared. So to say that all religions teach basically the same thing is a little bit ignorant in all honesty. And I don't mean ignorant in a pejorative sense like, you're ignorant. I mean ignorant in the technical sense of unlearned and unstudied. Now, when we begin to see that, we usually fall back into a second position I mentioned, which is a little bit more comfortable. And that is to say, okay, they're not all the same, but we can then know this. Each religion gets part of spiritual truth. And there's not one that is completely right or completely wrong. Each just sees part of spiritual truth, but none of them see the whole truth. So Christianity probably gets some things right and some things wrong. And Islam probably gets some things right and some things wrong. And Buddhism probably gets some things right and some things wrong. And same for Judaism. And same for all the non-religious kind of spiritualities that are practiced in our culture. Everyone gets something right, but probably gets something wrong too. So if we could extract the best parts of Christianity and we could extract the true parts of Islam and the true parts of Judaism and the true parts of Buddhism, if we could extract all of that and put it together, we would have maybe one coherent, comprehensive picture of truth. Unfortunately, we can't do that. So we just need to acknowledge that we all see some things that are true, but we all don't have the truth. And that sounds better, doesn't it? It gets you around the fact that religions teach different things. And this perspective even has a nice little illustration that goes with it. Maybe you've heard it before. It goes like this. Let's say there's 3 blind men, and they all stumble upon an elephant. And they all begin to touch the elephant. He is a docile, gentle elephant. And he will not crush them if they want to put their hands on him and touch them. And so one of the men goes and grabs hold of the elephant's trunk. And he says, "Oh, it's a long, cylindrical creature. It's flexible. It's like a big snake, this creature that we've encountered." And the other blind man begins to feel the elephant's ears and says, No, it's not long and cylindrical at all. It's flat and thin and rubbery. It's like a little hairy rubber pancake. And another one of the men bends over and he feels the elephant's ginormous toenails. And he says, "No, it's not a snake and it's not a pancake. It's smooth. It's not hairy at all. It's smooth. It's like a dinner plate almost." And these men begin to debate and begin to argue amongst themselves. "It's a snake. No, it's flat and thin and like a pancake. No, it's smooth like a dinner plate." And they begin to argue about how this creature is. This, so the story goes, is how religion works. We're all touching part of the elephant. And we're describing the elephant differently because we're all touching different parts of him. And if we could step back and see, and if we weren't all blind, we would see that this is an elephant. that we're looking at. And we're actually just touching different parts of the same creature. And this, so the story goes, is how religions interact with God. We're just each describing part of Him. Now, again, sounds good, but there's a catch even in that story. And the catch goes like this. When you say we're all touching different parts of the same elephant, the only way you can see that is if you can see that it's an elephant. The only way you can see that is if you have some kind of superior knowledge to these three guys, and you have a clearer, better, higher, all-inclusive perspective, and you see the whole elephant. That's the only way you know that those guys are all touching an elephant. You have to have a superior kind of knowledge. So now get this. That in and of itself is an exclusive claim. You're claiming, when you say that, all these religions see wrongly, but we see the whole truth, and we know that it's really one and the same elephant. And that itself is an exclusive truth claim. So even to say all religions only see part of the truth itself is a system of salvation that's an exclusive truth claim. So here's what I'm saying. Peter's claim that there is salvation in no one else is not the only exclusive claim being made in our culture. You're all touching the elephant. All religious and spiritual beliefs are just different paths to the same God. That is also an exclusive claim. Believe whatever you want as long as you submit to that claim is prominently taught in our culture. And that itself is an exclusive claim that relativizes all other systems of belief. It functions in the same way as the temple functioned in Jerusalem and as Caesar is Lord functioned in Rome. Believe whatever you want to as long as you don't ruffle that. So there's not just one exclusive truth claim being made. There's two. Now, when you begin to see that, here's what you're left with. There are no people, and there are none of us who live without some form of exclusive belief that we want everything else to come under. There's not one of us who doesn't have some form of exclusive belief by which we test all other claims to see if we'll even allow them a hearing in our mind. We all subscribe, whether it is there's one big elephant and you're all touching the same elephant, or whether it's Jesus is Lord or whether it's Caesar is Lord, we all subscribe to some kind of exclusive claim. And here's what that means. If we want to truly be intelligent about this, then you have no choice but to examine the different claims and see which one seems more substantial. That's the only choice you have. You can't automatically eliminate Jesus is Lord. You can't automatically just eliminate that and shrug it off because it sounds exclusive. Because in shrugging it off, you're using another exclusive claim to disbelieve that one. And so if you really want to be intelligent about Jesus and you really want to examine who he was and what it means to be a Christian and all of that, then you've got no choice but to examine this claim that he had. So, when the gospel was in Jerusalem, here in Acts chapter 4, the hearers were not being asked to choose an exclusive religion versus a non-exclusive one. They were being asked to choose between two exclusive claims, temple or Jesus. And when the gospel went to Rome, the hearers were not being asked to choose between pluralism and tolerance and exclusivity. They were being asked to choose between which exclusive claim they were going to submit to, Caesar or Jesus. And when the gospel comes into our culture, it's not asking us to become narrow-minded, exclusive, angry people. It's asking us to examine two different exclusive beliefs and to compare them and to see which one would stand up. That's what it's asking us to do. And so in the few minutes that we have left, here's what I want to do. I want to show you a couple of things in this passage about the gospel of Jesus that as we are processing and examining his claims, we ought to be thinking about and taking into account. And I've spent a lot of time unpacking for you why this claim of Peter was exclusive. But there's something else I want you to see here. It wasn't just exclusive. It was also a very, very unique claim. In fact, you might understand this better if you just understand how religion typically works and the pattern that is woven through most of religious thinking. Let's take, for example, Moses. Moses was a man who was chosen by God to represent the people before God. And Moses went up on the mountain of Sinai and he received, for 40 days, he received revelation from God as to God's law. And Moses brought the law down from the mountain and he gave it to the people. And for them, that became their path and their way to salvation. If you follow this law, here it is, you'll live. And in Judaism, that's how the law functioned. It functioned as a path to salvation. It functioned as a teaching. Do this and you will live. Now, if you think of, for example, Muhammad. Muhammad is called in Islam a prophet. And a prophet is someone who speaks for God. And so Muhammad lays out a path that you can follow that he claims will lead to salvation. If you examine the teachings of the Buddha, for example, you will find that the name Buddha means enlightened one. And he claimed to be a human who was more enlightened to spiritual things than anyone else. And the Buddha taught a path of salvation by which you can escape the cycle of suffering and death and pain in our world. But here's the thread that runs through all of those. Now, they all have very different claims, but here's the thread that runs through them all. A founder receives enlightenment or revelation and then teaches a way to salvation. But you have to walk that way yourself. And that is the typical religious teaching that we all hear in our world. Here is a path to salvation, and now you have to walk it. But Peter is claiming something different than that for Jesus. Listen again to verse 12. There is salvation in no one else. We often skip the word in, but we should talk about it a little bit. The little word in, when used as a preposition, means that something is encompassed in, or is enclosed in, or is embedded in something else. And what Peter is claiming here is that salvation is in a person, Jesus. He's claiming that Jesus doesn't just point a flashlight on the path and say, run along that path. I'm enlightened. Here's the flashlight. Run along that path. But Jesus actually claims that salvation is found in Him. Shortly before Jesus was arrested and tried, he was trying to get over to his disciples his uniqueness, and they didn't get it. They were still thinking of him as a teacher who was enlightening the way of salvation for them. So in John chapter 14, which is where he made that exclusive claim we read earlier, in John chapter 14, now we're going to get the whole context of that. Jesus was teaching them, and he said, in my Father's house are many rooms, and if it were not so, would I have told you that I go and prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, and I will take you to myself. Now there's a clue right there. I'm going to come again and take you, that where I am, you may be also. And you know the way to where I am going. Thomas, who was one of the 12 disciples, Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? And Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I am the way, Thomas. I didn't just come to teach you a path to follow. I came to take you there myself. The way is not to do a particular set of things. The way is to simply be united to me. Salvation is not just illuminated by me. It is in me. I am the way. Do you guys know the difference between a road and a bus? What is a road? A road is hopefully in our day, it's a paved path. And if you follow the road, and you've got the right road, if you follow the road, you will get to the destination toward which the road will take you. Now, do you know what a bus is? A bus is something that you get in and it drives the road for you. In fact, if you're in college, you're just in the back of the bus, just drinking cheap whiskey, right? And even though you're 2 sheets to the wind, you're still going to get there because you don't have to drive a bus. See, a road will get you there, but you've got to get yourself down the road. You've got to figure out a way to get down the road. You've got to walk, or you've got to rent a car, or you've got to bum a ride, but you've got to figure out a way down the road. But a bus doesn't just give you a path. A bus takes you there. In fact, you can get on a bus that says Los Angeles. You can get on a bus, go down to the Greyhound station this afternoon and get on a bus to Los Angeles. And in about 2 weeks, you don't even have to know, you can go to sleep. You don't have to know all the twists and turns of the road, but you'll get to Los Angeles. Jesus is not just a road, he's a bus. Now that is the difference. That is the uniqueness of Jesus from every other religion and every other religious teacher and every other religious founder. And so when Peter is saying, there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name given under heaven among men by which we must be saved. Now, do you guys know the difference between the active and the passive voice? You should never write in the passive voice because it sounds boring to your English teacher. You should always write in the active voice. But Peter was preaching in the passive voice. There is no other name given under heaven among men by which we must be saved. And in the passive voice, the subject doesn't do the action. The subject receives the action. Salvation is not something we do by walking the road. It's something we receive by getting on the bus. Walking a road is active. Sitting on a bus is passive. When Peter claimed that, he was not just making some narrow, exclusive claim, and he was not just trying to mock other religions, and he wasn't trying to convert you into being a narrow and exclusive person. He was saying, this is the only way that actually works. He's making this claim as a statement of fact. Jesus is the only one who actually saves. Now that's what he's asking us to consider. Being a Christian does not convert you from a tolerant person to an exclusive person. It converts you from one kind of exclusivity which might not work to a better kind of exclusivity which does work. Now, we actually have not just the teaching here of Peter in Acts chapter 4, we actually have the benefit of hindsight. We have some 1925-ish years of history. I bungled that. 1975-ish years of history by which we can test these claims and see if maybe Peter was onto something, that this was the only way that works. So remember this scenario we kind of set up earlier, that there's not one exclusive truth claim, but two here. It's not Jesus and versus tolerance, it's Jesus or temple. There's not one claim, but two. Now, in light of history, which of those seems more plausible? Do you know what became of the Sadducees and the chief priests and the captain of the temple and the temple itself? In 70 AD, it was ransacked by Rome, and those cats were driven from power. And there has never been a temple in Jerusalem since. And so if salvation is through the temple, we're all in a very bad shape because there is no temple. And do you know what happened to Jesus? He was raised from the dead, and he's alive, and he continued to change people's lives, and he continues to do it to this day. And seen in the light of history, those two exclusive claims, it's pretty obvious which one panned out and which one didn't. Or what about Caesar is Lord versus Jesus is Lord? Do you know what happened to Caesar? Caesar died. And the Caesar after him died. And the Caesar after him died. And eventually the Romans were sacked by the barbarians, overthrown by primitive people wearing grass skirts. And the Vikings, who are now just a football team in Minnesota. And the Roman Empire was overthrown, and the Roman Empire is no more today. And if you put your trust in Caesar, it didn't get you very far. And do you know what has happened to Jesus since then? He's evidently still alive, and he has continued to convert people and change people's lives all over the world and continues to do so to this day. And do you know what will happen to our insistence that all religions are equally valid? 100 years from now, we will all be dead. And the next generations will look back in history and they will laugh and giggle at our naivety, and they will have some other objection to Christianity. And do you know what Jesus will be doing? He'll still be alive. He'll still be changing people's lives. He'll still be giving them salvation. And so when you just look back through the lens of history, you begin to see that this claim of Jesus is not so absurd after all. And he's not asking you to convert to be a narrow-minded, exclusive, religious person. In fact, one of the main objections in our culture is, won't this make you a hating person? Won't this cause you to be arrogant towards people of other faith? Now, if you just play out what happened to this early church, not at all. These guys laid down their lives for other people. And wherever Christianity has flourished, Christians have not been arrogant towards people who don't believe. They've been humble and they've been gentle because they sing things like, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but someone found me." Not I found my way. Someone came and found me. I was blind, but now I see. And so the principle of grace that runs through this very system of salvation that Jesus has set up, and the one that is the only one that works, the very system of grace undermines any arrogance. It undermines any attempt to be violent. It undermines any hatred of people who don't believe like you believe. It undermines any arrogance towards people who don't see as clearly because your eyes were opened. You didn't open them yourself. Some people go, well, what about, there are arrogant, obnoxious Christians in the world. That's right, there are. And here's the problem with arrogant, obnoxious Christians. It's not that they're zealously Christian, it's that they're not Christian enough. They don't get enough that Jesus is a bus that they got on, not a road they walked. It's not that they see the gospel so clearly that it makes them arrogant. It's that they don't see the gospel clearly enough to be humble. And so Jesus is not trying to convert you into being a narrow-minded, arrogant, angry, hating person. He's trying to convert you to the only way that truly works. And if you look back through the lens of history, the temple is destroyed. The Sadducees and the chief priests are dead. Caesar is dead. The Roman Empire is destroyed. Our day and our culture and our society will one day be just a little footnote on the butt of history, and Jesus is still alive. And to believe that salvation is found in no one else does not make you a narrow and exclusive person. It would actually make you wise and humble, and you would be no fool to believe in that. Would you pray with me? Father, I confess this is a very difficult claim that Jesus has made. It's always been difficult, and it's difficult in our world. And I find a lot of tension myself in holding it amongst a culture that has another system of salvation that wants to relativize all religious claims. So I pray that you would open our eyes and help us to see the trustworthiness of Jesus. I pray that we would see, in light of history and in light of where the world is going, his claim is not so dumb. And I pray that you would open many of our eyes and help us to embrace him fully for who he is, even his weird and offensive parts, and see that maybe this is because he actually is the only one who sees the whole elephant and sees more clearly than even we do. And so I put my faith in him, and I pray that many in this room and many listening will do the very same thing. And I pray that this claim would not make us in any way arrogant people, but that it would humble us, that it would in no way make us arrogant towards people who believe differently, people of other faiths, but it would humble us. But I pray at the same time that we would hold to and we would see and we would believe in and we would celebrate in our own souls and for our friends and neighbors the uniqueness of Jesus, that he does something that no other claim, no other way has ever done. And so we thank you. I thank you that he is not just a teacher, but he is a Savior. I thank you that he came and found me. He didn't just send me a memo on how to get unlost and send me packing to find my own way, but he came and found me. And I pray we would be incredibly humbled and incredibly thankful by this incredible grace. We ask it in his name and by his Spirit. Amen.